Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Me too. So, start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, your career journey, and sort of what led you to the world of brand strategy.
Sure. Well, I was born about the same time as the concept of positioning itself. And that concept, of course, came to the world from my father, Al Ries and Jack Trout, back in the 70s. And I've grown up with positioning. It's been there all my life. And I learned it from a very age, from the very best there was, Al Ries, who is my father and longtime partner and co-author for many years. So my journey really began then, right? At home, I learned about positioning. I went to the office with my father and got to see him in practice and traveled the world with him as a kid, even to see him on stage and with clients. And I just got excited about it. And reading the book I did in middle school, I read the positioning book that my father wrote, and I was blown away. It just really got me even more excited about what was going on. So it was always in the back of my head. I wanted to go into the family business. I went to college. I worked in an advertising agency in New York City, Madison Avenue, for a year. It was a great experience, but my lifelong dream was to be a positioning consultant. And so I teamed up with my dad and we started together on a 28-year journey almost. He passed in 2022 at almost 96. And what a wonderful life and legacy is left. And I am so excited to bring positioning to a new generation of readers and marketers, as well as bring some of my own ideas, which I'm super excited to talk to you about today.
Yeah, so that really sort of sets the stage for your work. And so, for those who haven't read it, what is The Strategic Enemy about and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. Well, written many books, and always the inspiration comes with working with clients, with looking at what's happening in the world, what the successful cases and disastrous cases are, and learning from that. And positioning came from that. At the start, it was how do we do the best work for the agent, for the agency, which my father was building, and the clients. So for the strategic enemy, what did it come from? And when working with clients, we always talk about, how are we going to position the company? What idea are we going to own in the mind? And it just so happened that sometimes the best way to figure that out was to not just think about ourselves, but what are we fighting against? What are we going up against? What are we saying no to? Because that will do two things. It will lend itself to a focus, and a focus is key to positioning and building a brand. And it also brings clarity. That contrast brings clarity to consumers to best understand what you're saying, but by first saying what you're not. I mean, if you think about when the iPhone launched, it didn't just talk about all the features. It said this was a smartphone, and what you have now in your hands is a dumb phone, right? They instantly repositioned the enemy, the competition, and to bring their position, their category into a new light.
Yeah. And so, the title itself is just immediately grabs attention.
Joe,
Tell us a little bit
the cover
more.
is very exciting.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by the strategic enemy.
Sure. First and foremost, the cover of a book is incredibly important, as is the title. And first and foremost, it's got to get attention, right? You need to have a little bit of a sharp edge. I mean, to cut through the clutter. I mean, that's what, again, sharp positioning, sharp branding is all about. And so that's where the idea came from. But in essence, what is a strategic enemy? It is the oppositional force that your brand stands against. Now, it could be a competitor in the category, but it also could be another category itself. It could be an idea or a concept, something that you, in fact, are fighting against. Liquid death, for example, that's, water in cans. And the enemy they've identified is not another water brand per se, but it's the concept of plastic bottles, death to plastic, right? They have made plastic itself the enemy by saying it's polluting our environment, it's not being recycled, and aluminum is infinitely recyclable. That's a very powerful strategy that sets up. Now, what are we going to do with the brand? Now they have, the edgy marketing, the murder your thirst idea, because it also connects to that enemy concept.
Yeah. And so let's dive in a little bit more. Why do you think companies often sort of misidentify who or what their real competition is?
The biggest problem with companies out there is they're doing too many things in too many places. They've got too much going on. They're trying to be everything to everyone. And there's no way that you can have a narrow focus. And in fact, there's no way you can have an enemy. Most companies have become their own worst enemy, right? By line extension, by trying to be too many things to too many people. They no longer stand for one idea that can stand against something out there in the marketplace and in the mind of the consumer.
Mhm. So can you give us a real world example of what that could look like in real life when something goes wrong?
Yeah. Well, think about what has happened to Budweiser and then Bud Light over the years. Budweiser is the king of beers. It was the first nationally distributed beer and became the leader overall, right? Powerful idea, powerful visual hammer. Visuals are incredibly important. They drive memory and emotion into a brand. And so you've got the Clydesdales and the beer wagon for Budweiser. Now, as light beer took off, they decided to line extend, right? They had Bud Light. Now, here's the thing. When all your competitors are line extended, the winning line extension is the leader. And Bud Light took over leadership from Miller Lite. But here's the problem. Then what happened? Into the 2000s, the competition for Bud Light was no longer light beer, regular beer. The competition was really Mexican, twisted, and hard. You had hard lemonade, hard all sorts of products, as well as the Mexican imports from Corona to Modelo and others. What did Bud Light decide to do? Line extension. If people want lime in their beer, we're going to have Bud Light Lime. People want seltzer, we're going to have Bud Light Seltzer. People want hard soda, we're going to have Bud Light Hard Soda. People want mixed stuff, we're going to have Bud Light Arita, right? Crazy. What is a Bud Light anymore? Can you identify it? It's a brand that lost its way. Instead of saying, we are light beer, right? We've got to go up against and promote that concept. And in fact, at that time, I think Bud and Bud Light should have joined forces, much like you've seen what Coca-Cola and Coke Zero have done, right? They're under one red umbrella, right? One brand and two different varieties to face the competition that is energy drinks and waters and healthy sodas and all these other categories out there. So sometimes that idea is coming together to fight what that enemy is out there and understanding, who it is at whatever point in time and doing the right thing for your brand in the moment.
Mm-hmm. So then on the flip side, what's an example of a company that identified the right enemy and gained a huge competitive advantage?
Sure. Well, another great example I love is Dude Wipes. Dude Wipes is a brand many people are talking about. And what did they do? Listen, they didn't actually innovate or pioneer the idea. There were line extensions out there that did, from, Charmin, wet wipes, and they had all these things out there, but they really didn't gain traction because Charmin's big business is in dry toilet paper. How could they say that their wet paper was better? They couldn't. And it led to weak positioning. And that's where Dude Wipes saw an opportunity. I mean, those products didn't appeal to him and his buddies out of college, living in a, crazy shared space. I mean, they were using baby wipes, but those weren't flushable. He said, what if we narrowed down on this idea and branded it in a way and positioned it in a way that really got attention and really took on in a strong way the enemy? Toilet paper, dry toilet paper. Send it back to the Stone Ages is what Dude Wipes tells everyone. And that is a concept that is very, very powerful. And they are leading the way, believe me, taking down, the Charmins and the Cottonelles and all those other players that are big companies by having a narrow focus and going strongly with that strategic enemy idea.
Mm-hmm. So obviously identifying the right enemy has major implications. So if leaders want to get this right, where should they start?
Well, there's two things. One, I mean, if you're pioneering a new category, that is incredibly exciting. It's one of the biggest opportunities in building a there. How can we position ourselves that we are the first in a new category? That sets up a very powerful open hole in the mind that you can fill. And when you're thinking about that, identifying the enemy, there's some very key concepts. First, you want to identify something that is known and frustrating to consumers, right? By focusing in on that. It has to be solvable by your product, right? You've got to have a simple solution to that. And most importantly, it's got to create contrast to something else, right? The pre-existing category or, another competitor. You think about when Duracell came in, Eveready was the leader in batteries. They pioneered it, but that was a time when batteries are mainly flashlight batteries. And then came the transistor era and we had more, electronic devices with more battery needs. And so the alkaline battery was developed. Now, Eveready just came out with another line, right? Another line extension. We had Eveready flashlight and we had Eveready alkaline. Well, that's what big companies tend to do. But another company thought of, what if we had a new brand? A new brand focused in on that. And we gave it a good name to talk about the longer lasting alkaline benefits. And they gave it the name Duracell. Nice name. And they said it lasts, longer than Eveready regular. That was a powerful positioning idea that set them up to become the leader in batteries. And it took time for alkaline to take over the market. But that set up them to be the leader, and they continue to this day.
Yeah. So then how should leaders go about identifying their biggest external challenge or rival and being able to see that that's coming?
Well, you obviously have to be out there in the marketplace. I mean, not just internally thinking about, most companies love their brand, right? They see their brand as the best thing ever. Dale Carnegie said, a person's name is the sweetest sounding word in the whole, vocabulary. And that's the same thing I think is true in companies. When you say the company name, it's terrific. We should put this company name on anything. That's not the power for the consumer. The consumer actually is more excited about categories than brands. I kid you not. I mean, I am a branding expert, but it's the brands we verbalize in brands, but we think in categories. It's not the brand name Red Bull that is so exciting. It's because they pioneered energy drinks. And that name is then a replacement for the category itself. And so that's why it becomes confusing when you put that same brand name on multiple categories. And then it doesn't allow you to find that strategic enemy. Again, for existing companies, most are doing too many things. They've got to narrow the focus so that they can strongly go up against something. And listen, all is not lost. If you're a big company, the opportunity is not to line extend the brand you have, but the opportunity to launch a new brand. Mike's Hard Lemonade was a terrific brand, right? It pioneered hard lemonade. And as consumers were switching away from beers into other hard drinks, hard lemonade was a big success. But then what happened? All of a sudden consumers realize, oh my gosh, this thing has as much sugar as a Coca-Cola and a ton of calories. So what do you do when you see the market is changing and tastes are changing? I mean, they could have, and they did come out with some line extensions, but the big idea, what did they do? They launched White Claw, and they took a clean sheet of paper with it. How can we best position a product that is a hard seltzer, right? They gave it a new category name, a new brand name that lent itself to a visual. They also communicated that originally, beer was for bros and wine was for girls. Well, White Claw is for everyone. Consumers are hanging out together. We don't separate by gender anymore. And that was another very powerful part of the idea, and them leading the way in that new category with a new brand.
So then taking that, how can smaller companies use the ideas in your book to compete with much larger players?
Sure. Listen, in any great position, there's always the opportunity to do it differently, right? There's always a weakness in every strength, right? And look at Amazon. Amazon, is the big winner in online shopping. Of course, they started narrow. They pioneered by being online books, primarily focusing on bestsellers at a deep discount, right? And today they sell everything to everybody. They're also very consumer focused, right? Because that's their end consumer and that's what they're all about. So how do you compete against them? Well, it's not easy. Most people try to be the same, but better, right? And we had a lot of competitors that went in the market, many of which failed. Who's the strongest competitor to Amazon? It's Shopify. Shopify is the merchant hero. You see, for merchants on Amazon, it's not easy. They're not looking out for you necessarily. But on Shopify, it's all about the merchant. And they do the best to allow the merchants to set up their own store and to make it easy and make it, successful for them, and giving them all the tools and really being on their side. And today, when you're, setting up your, online business, it's a big choice. Amazon or Shopify, right? That duality is super important. And always it's the contrast, right? By being, your Coca-Cola and you're the real thing. And then what was the opposite? Pepsi was the choice of a new generation. And those contrasting positions is what, categories we see in the end is all about.
Yeah. So what about when companies are facing multiple competitors? How do you recommend they focus on the most important battle?
Well, it's a case. Listen, it's a case by case situation. I mean, marketing is both an art and a science. I mean, you can't just put it into a formula and spit out the answer. Every situation has to be very closely studied. And that's, what makes it so fun and interesting for me as a positioning consultant. And why, it's the theories are very easy to write about in the books. They're very difficult to put into practice in the real world. And we know that. But, the simplicity at the core is about what do we focus? What are we saying no to? Who are we opposing? What are we standing against? And in almost every situation, we found you can find that answer. Now, sometimes you can pick the wrong enemy. Absolutely, this is the case. And one great example recently in the news is, I don't know if you heard of this, there's friend.com. This is a AI friend that they say is better than real friendships. In fact, they very clearly made real friends the enemy. Now, they've had a big campaign in New York subway systems. I don't know if you've seen it, but
I have, yes.
Really upset about this. I mean, it struck a chord because this is not a issue people think is a problem. Real friends aren't a problem. It's just hard to find them. It's hard to connect with them. And to say that AI is better than real friends, that's not something that's resonating very well. And consumers have spoken up very loudly about that.
Yeah, they sure have. Now, when it comes to competition and, some of the things that you've worked with businesses across different industries, anything that you see in terms of a pattern and how leaders misjudge the competition?
Misjudge. The pattern. The pattern we often see is the inability to focus, right? And when you get successful, unfortunately, the inclination is to what else can we get into, right? Instead of thinking, how can we solidify our anchor? How can we make what it is we stand for appeal to more people? And that's the true opportunity. Instead of running around doing more stuff, doing more, building up the interest in the category against whatever that, strategic enemy is, so that people feel even more excited. Listen, categories take a while to take off. Red Bull took 10 years to reach $100 million. Look, what are the new ones today? In healthy soda, we have Olipop and Poppy. Now, the traditional brands have tried to compete with line extensions. That's the loser way to do it. That's not going to be successful when you have strong brands out there. So, the opportunity for companies is, how can we keep our focus? Are there second brand opportunities that we can take advantage? But most importantly, reinforcing what we are. And you see that, look at the news. You see big companies, they expand, they get into trouble, and then all of a sudden they're all about refocusing and going back to the core. That's right. I don't know why they strayed from it. You have Nike going back to athletes. Well, that was their core all along. Why are they messing with, trying to appeal to fashion and other things? Nike is about athleticism. They pioneered the first athletic running shoe. I mean, that was all about what they were stood for. Starbucks going back to coffee. I mean, it's like they say it like it's a big revelation. Well, of course, Starbucks is coffee. And here's the thing. You don't have to communicate everything you do. I mean, just because you sell some tea in the store, that's fine, but you don't have to talk about it. Your advertising is best to reinforce your core strength and positioning, your core message. Advertising is not a way to, change someone's mind. It's a way to remind them of something they already believe. And that's a truly important principle.
Yeah. And we have mentioned AI and, technology is changing things, and it's changing things very fast. How do you see AI, technology, digital disruption impacting this type of positioning, or how leaders should be thinking about the strategic enemy?
Yeah, no, it is so exciting to see what's going on with AI and how it's changing. And we're all it's like the internet. I mean, all of a sudden, we all have the internet as part of our business, our lives, everything we do. And I think AI will be, partly that same way. But where's the true opportunity for building a business? Now, if you go back to the early part of the internet and when Google came about, they weren't the first search engine. But what did Google do? They did it differently and they stood out. Where Yahoo had a messy page with all sorts of boards and Yahoo was into everything. Google said, we're only going to do search. And we're going to do it in a really powerful way with that clean white page and just the search bar. But Google is, in danger, right? Today, AI has become the first place we go to look for information. And ChatGPT, of course, leading the way, the brand most of us know. But there's always, I think, going to be opportunities for specialists for a narrow focus. You have Claude, which is trying to position itself as the thinking type of AI. I think you're going to have brands that out there that do take those narrow positions and think about what is it we stand for and how can we do it different. I mean, you see Claude has a different color to their webpage, which I think is a very important, visually stimulating, differentiation that helps, communicate, what it is you're doing in a different way as well.
Yeah. And you also talk about timeless strategy in your book.
Yeah.
Tell us what hasn't changed, even in today's fast-moving technology constantly changing. What have you seen that hasn't changed?
Positioning hasn't changed, right? Positioning is a concept that's been around for 50 years, and I think it's just as relevant today as it was when it was first introduced. Why? Because positioning is all about the mind of the consumer. The mind hasn't changed, right? It's very difficult to get into the mind, and you have to find that open hole. You have to go against other competitors. You have to bring contrast to bring understanding to your brand. And, the reason for positioning itself was the over communicated society, right? Back in the 70s, you could just blast your way onto, television advertising. Well, today advertising's everywhere. Getting attention has become more and more a challenge. And positioning helps answer that. And that's where it's strategic, right? It's the strategy part of the brand building and maintaining process. Tactics absolutely have changed dramatically, right? You had TV advertising, magazines, you had internet, you had social media, and now we have, of course, AI, and all of those things are going to bring different tactical, things you need to know, things you need to do. But unless you know what your brand stands for, unless you have that positioning, those tactics are not going to be successful for you. You need to have that first. You need to establish that, maintain it, and go for it in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so for leaders outside the corporate world, say in nonprofits or education, how can these ideas still apply?
Absolutely. I've worked with many nonprofits. I've sat on many nonprofits boards, and positioning is an incredibly powerful tool and strategy to understand. And here's what it is. I mean, you might say, in most cases for a nonprofit, the enemy is not doing something, right? Of course. And, there's a lot of, let's think about it. There's a lot of competition in nonprofit because we only have so much money or time to give to these. And there's so many worthy causes out there. So how can you build a powerful nonprofit? It comes down to first thinking about a focus. And one of my favorites is Tunnel to Towers. What have they done? Now, they're helping people after, 9/11 and combat and such and helping them heal. But they did something, not just we're going to be all things great and helping veterans. I mean, that's a noble idea and concept, but they were more specific. They said it's all about mortgage-free homes. What's the enemy? These veterans that are overwhelmed with mortgage payments, or the widows left behind or widowers left behind that have to pay these mortgages. It's very clear, it's very strategic, it's very specific, and that becomes a very understandable cut through the clutter. Now I know exactly what I'm giving for. Now, do they do other things? Sure, but it is that focus on mortgage-free homes for heroes that cuts through, that's memorable, that, I mean, it brings chills just thinking about that and how that brings, strong emotion to what they're doing.
Yeah. So then how can teams at all levels, not just the executives, how can they benefit from thinking about the enemy, and how should leaders and organizations prepare their teams so that they're thinking in this manner?
Well, I do think that the strategy has to come from the top, right? And so they have to set the strategy, set the directions, as well as put in the guardrails about what we're not going to get into, right? And not let the teams go in all different directions. And think about one of my heroes here in Atlanta is Chick-fil-A. And what did Chick-fil-A do? They pioneered the fried chicken sandwich. And they were one of the only chains that didn't get into hamburgers, right? They focused on chicken. And because they focused on chicken, now we got a strong positioning message. And for 30 years, they have cows on every advertisement and all their stuff saying, eat more chicken. And they've ridden the success and rising interest in chicken as a healthier alternative to beef and other meats. And that's been a huge part of the success. But think about it also internally. As a company and the culture, it's nice to know, what are we going to work to fight, right? What do we stand for? We're about chicken. Chicken is a healthier alternative. This is what we're all about. And we're also going to give nice customer service and add all these other things, but it's a strong motivator, I think, internally at the company to best understand what it is we're doing. Apart from making money and being good to our customers and employees and all of that, but what is it we're really doing? And again, another one is Snapchat. What did Snapchat do? There are lots of social media platforms, but their big idea, listen, on Instagram, on Facebook, we were all posting the perfect moments of our lives, many times face tuned and all these other things to look perfect. And we all got FOMO and got sick of it. Kids just wanted to have quick conversations that weren't seen by their parents and weren't saved forever. And so Snapchat had disappearing messages, right? They instantly go away. Although be careful, kids, there are ways to save them, but disappearing messages. It was a new way of communicating with the kids and a very different way from what was going else out there on the other platforms. And listen, when you have that focus, now we can think of a way to visualize it. And the visual is a very important part of the strategy. As I said, it brings distinctiveness visually, emotion, memorability. And what did Snapchat use? They use the ghost, right? The disappearing yellow ghost, or it's white with the yellow background, to show and visually symbolize what it is we stand for and what we stand against.
Yeah. And, as you said, you've been doing this for a long time. You've seen your father also pioneer and work in this industry. How have you seen globalization change sort of the competitive landscape and the idea of a strategic enemy?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So, positioning has gone global. It's one of the best-selling marketing books in the world. It continues to sell well. And it allowed me and my father to travel the world. And we worked and traveled to over 60 countries. And what's really exciting and interesting as well, they've all, picked up and, doing positioning for their companies in their different countries. Now we have the opportunity to have global brands. And the United States has done a very good job at that. I think last I looked, about out of the top 100, 50 of those are from the United States. We are known for marketing and doing positioning, very, very well, and then building those global brands. But to go global for any brand, it is about narrowing the focus. Because you think about in most small countries, you have to be into many businesses, right? But you can't, for example, Nokia was into lots of different, from rubber and tires, lots of different businesses. But when they went global, they picked one line, and that was the cell phone. And they, at one time, they were the world leader in cell phones, right? A very narrow focus in going global and narrow message to pioneer, hopefully, that new category. So in thinking about, globalization, tremendous opportunity. And, thinking about what your country stands for as it relates to it. So you think, what is the perception of the country? For Germany, for example, they're known for engineering, and we have BMW and Porsche and other brands that, connect with that idea and, utilize that in a great way. Or Italy. Italy is known for fashion and food, and most importantly, pasta. And who's the leader in pasta? It's Barilla. This was a brand that, came into the market in the US in the 90s, but quickly took over because of they use, what was their strategy? We are the number one pasta of Italy. Well, leadership is a motivating force for any consumers. It's believable. If you say you're better, people say, that's what they all say. When you say we're the leader in pasta in Italy, that's powerful credentials. Here's the funny thing. We worked with another Italian company, Ely Espresso, which is a world leader, right, in espresso, and very fancy from Milan. And we said, oh, we have this Barilla pasta here in America now. We're so lucky. And they said, ugh, that is terrible pasta. That's what they feed in the schools and the prisons, right? It's a big brand, but it's not seen as high end. But it doesn't matter, right? That the perception is reality, and being perceived as the leader in Italy is a very strong positioning.
Yeah. So finally, if readers take away one idea from the strategic enemy, what do you hope it would be?
It's not just what you stand for. Don't forget, figure out what you are standing against.
That's
Give yourself-
powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. Well, Laura, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all your insights.
Absolutely. Anytime. It's a super pleasure. Thanks.
And we'll see you next time on Starter TV.